Amadou left Dakar one November morning. The sun was already high up in the sky. A stifling heat hung over the city. He was leaving behind his wife, Aissa, and his two young children, Fatou and Mamadou. It was very hard. But Amadou held on to his dream. He was going to Canada to give them a better life. In Senegal, Amadou was a math teacher. He had a good job and a simple but comfortable house. His life was simple, but he was happy. Still, Amadou wanted more. He dreamed of a life where his children could have every opportunity to succeed. For him, Canada was like a dreamland, a land of opportunity, education, and freedom. He had heard so many stories of immigrants who had made it there. He was sure that he too could make a better life for his family there. Amadou kissed his wife and children one last time. He promised to bring them over as soon as he could. With tears in his eyes, he got into the taxi that would take him to the airport. His heart was heavy with sadness, but also full of hope. He was leaving for the unknown, but he was determined to succeed. During the long flight to Montreal, Amadou kept replaying images of his life in Dakar in his mind. His wife's smile, his children's laughter, the lively conversations with his friends. He already felt a pang of sadness thinking about everything he was leaving behind. But excitement quickly took over. He imagined his new life in Canada. A big modern apartment, a new car, good schools for his children. He would work hard, save money, and send money every month to his family back in Senegal. Amadou had spent hours learning about Canada. He had read articles, watched documentaries, and talked to people who had already immigrated. Everyone agreed that Canada was a welcoming, multicultural country, offering many opportunities to skilled immigrants like him. He was sure he would find a teaching job quickly. After all, he had experience, spoke French, and had graduated from a good university. Amadou was sure that his skills would be valued in a developed country like Canada. The plane finally landed at Pierre Elliott Trudeau International Airport. Amadou felt a thrill of excitement as he stepped onto Canadian soil. The air was cold and dry, very different from the humid heat of Dakar. He took a taxi to the apartment he had rented online. It was a small studio apartment in the Côte des Neiges neighborhood, known for its large immigrant population. The apartment was modest, not at all what he had imagined. The rent was very high, much more expensive than he had expected. Despite everything, Amadou was determined to stay positive. He went out to explore his new neighborhood. The streets were clean and well kept, lined with trees in bright autumn colors. He discovered restaurants with food from all over the world, shops with attractive window displays and green parks. The city seemed lively and cosmopolitan, yet Amadou couldn't help but feel a little lost, a little alone in this unfamiliar crowd. The language barrier, even though he understood and spoke French, was harder than he had thought. The Quebecois expressions, the accent, the rhythm of speech, everything was different. The first few weeks in Canada were a time of big changes for Amadou. He spent his days sending out resumes, searching job websites, and doing phone interviews. He was surprised at how hard it was to find a job, even in his field. He was always asked for Canadian experience, knowledge of the Quebec education system, and local references. His Senegalese diplomas, even though they were recognized in his country, didn't seem to matter here. He faced rejection after rejection and broken promises. Amadou's spirit started to fall. He realized that being an immigrant was very different from what he had thought. The cost of living was very high, finding a job was a huge struggle, and he was starting to feel lonely. He spent his evenings alone in his small studio talking to his family on Skype. He told them about his days, trying to hide his problems because he didn't want them to worry. He kept telling them that he would find a good job eventually, that he would soon be able to bring them over. Months went by, and Amadou's situation didn't get any better. He had used up all his savings, and now he had to take any job he could find just to survive. He worked as a night delivery man, a cashier in a grocery store, or a janitor in a shopping mall. These jobs were tiring and didn't pay much, nothing like his dream of being a math teacher. He felt ashamed to have to take these unrewarding jobs, especially since he had always had a good and respected job in his country. The Canadian dream had become a nightmare. Amadou felt stuck. He was struggling to pay his rent, to eat properly, and to send money to his family. He was always stressed, feeling like he had failed and let down the people he loved. Loneliness and isolation. On top of his money and job problems, Amadou felt very lonely. He didn't know anyone in Montreal except for a few people from Senegal he met in his neighborhood. He found it hard to connect with Canadians. The language and cultural differences were hard to overcome. He spent his evenings alone in his apartment, watching television or browsing the internet. He tried to read, but he couldn't focus. He kept thinking about his wife and children, about the life he had left and might never have again. He felt bad for leaving them, for making them believe in a better future that now seemed impossible. He was ashamed that he had failed, that he couldn't adjust to his new life. He wondered what he was doing there, so far from home, in this cold and unwelcoming country. The weight of regret. One evening, as he was walking home after a long day at work, Amadou broke down. He fell on his bed, feeling completely hopeless. He felt completely lost, crushed by regret. He realized that he had made a big mistake by leaving Senegal. He had given up his life, his family, his happiness for a dream that wasn't real. He had believed in the promise of a perfect place that didn't exist, at least not for him. He realized he had nothing left to do in Canada. He just wanted to go home, to be with his wife and children again, and try to rebuild his life. He didn't care about living simply, as long as he could be with the people he loved. But going back seemed impossible. He had spent all his money and he couldn't afford a plane ticket back to Senegal. He felt stuck, a prisoner of a broken dream. The shattered dream. Amadou tried to contact the Senegalese embassy in Ottawa to ask for help. They told him that he wasn't eligible for any financial help and that he had to find his own way to get back to his country. He tried to call his friends and family back in Senegal, but he was ashamed to tell them he had failed. He didn't want to disappoint them or make them deal with his problems. He felt alone in the world, like everyone had abandoned him. Amadou slowly sank into a deep depression. He stopped looking for a job and just lived day by day, relying on the kindness of a few people he knew. He spent his days wandering the streets of Montreal like a ghost. A glimmer of hope. One day, while sitting on a bench in a park, Amadou met an elderly Quebecois woman. She saw that he looked upset and started talking to him. Amadou didn't want to talk at first, but finally, he told her his story, his broken dreams, his despair. The old woman listened carefully without saying a word. When Amadou finished his story, she smiled kindly and said, "Don't give up hope, my boy. Life has good times and bad times. There's always a light at the end of the tunnel." She then offered to help him contact an organization that helps immigrants. Amadou was doubtful, but he accepted. He had nothing left to lose. It might be a chance to get out of this mess, to feel like he had some dignity again.